I've wanted to get the complete physical editions of every Silent Hill game, and it's a really bad time to do this
Yeah, that's
because
like the
I've
worst
You might
time,
argue
Ryan.
it's the worst time.
I've already paid over $100 for Silent Hill 3, which it's very hard to get. Thankfully, yeah.
Man, the face Keith just made. One of our favorite things to do in this podcast is to not just talk about an individual video game or movie. If we can, we try to talk about the sequels to create this complete experience, because sometimes maybe you played the first game but not the sequels, or you watched the first two movies but you didn't complete a trilogy. And recently, we've been doing that with Terminator, where we recently covered Genesis, but last year we did something a little bit differently. In October, we talked about Silent Hill 2 for the PlayStation 2. That's one of many people's favorite horror games of all time, video games of all time in general, not just for the PlayStation 2. And there was that lingering topic that we've talked about Resident Evil 2 and 3, so it felt weird that we talked about Silent Hill 2 and not 1, and that's going to be happening right here, right now, on another exciting episode of A Cast of the Past, with a brand new episode coming at you each and every Sunday with yours truly from Puerto Rico. My name is Juan Villas. Joining me from Boston, Massachusetts, we have the man of the hour, because every time people talk about Silent Hill, he gets a little bit tingly. So, Mr. McNulty, I mean, it's a good kind of tingly. How excited are you to finally... It's like the two games that I feel like you need to have. Like, after this, the podcast can close off, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Some of the must plays on my list, at least in the survival horror area, we've now finally covered. So last year we did Silent Hill 2, and I figured it made sense to go back and do Silent Hill 1. We also watched the movie last year, so certainly you guys can get a better understanding of what the movie was trying to do and where they might have messed up in so many different ways when you actually have now seen what the original game is like.
Yeah, so for those that haven't checked it out, as Ryan mentioned, we have both the movie episode and Silent Hill 2 episode available on the archives, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see this happen. And now Keith Posha from London, Ontario.
Excuse me, it's Keith Hamilton.
Keith Hamilton, I changed it again. Man, it's a little while ago. But as the Resident Evil fan of the podcast.
Resident.
Oh, there we go. How excited were you to go back to this one? Because last year, you were pretty surprised with Silent Hill 2, right?
Yeah, that game took me really off guard. It brings me back to when we first did Resident Evil 2 on the podcast, and Ryan had mentioned that the Resident Evil games are kind of like the Silent Hill games that he never played. I'm very much experiencing the same things, especially with Silent Hill 1, where these kind of feel like the Resident Evil games I never played, and I've really enjoyed them for that. And I'll give a little disclaimer. I know that this is a Silent Hill episode, and for some reason, disclaimer made my Google Home go off, and I don't know why, but... This is a Silent Hill episode. It's true. So, Resident Evil 2 was my jam as a kid, and I'm on the Resident Evil side of the East Coast, West Coast thing that goes on with these two genres. I will probably end up talking about Resident Evil a lot in this episode, just because it is my point of comparison, and I very much feel like this is a Resident Evil game I never played, even though it's kind of Silent Hill.
For me, I'm gonna be playing two roles. So it's gonna be a referee, right, just to make sure it's an even battle between both of you. But then also, I had this chance where, growing up, I played RE2, but I hadn't beaten RE2 or 3 till we got to it on the podcast. This is one of those games that I remember being blown away when I saw it visually, right? I saw like the spooky tone, the fog. I think the fog is going to be something that's going to be part of our conversation. But going back now, especially that there's been so many rumors about, hey, is Sony going to announce like some kind of remake or not or something like that? And I think it is worth pointing, not just because the topic of Resident Evil may be factored into all of this. Let's give some context, right? We are going to be going back to 1999. So when talking about that, if the question is which games came out that year, we have Silent Hill 1, but we also have Resident Evil 3, not 2. And I think in hindsight, some people kind of think that RE1 or 2 came out at the same time as Silent Hill 1. So it's like this whole thing
that
where
really caught me off guard because in my head I've always kind of put Resident Evil Director's Cut and Silent Hill together because they're the first ones in the genre. But no, by the time that Silent Hill came out, like Resident Evil 2 was long out at this point.
Yeah, and I think that's partly the inspiration behind it was you have Resident Evil kind of being this runaway success, and I think Konami wanted to find a way to sort of catch up and enter that space but do something a little bit different.
And overall, this was a big year because we're talking about Final Fantasy VIII, Crazy Taxi, Legacy of Kain, Crash Team Racing, Shenmue, Dino Crisis. I think that eventually that's one of those games that I'm like, it's got that similar gameplay style. But
yeah, have you ever played Dino Crisis, Ryan?
No, I think was Juan, your stream where you showing footage of Dino Crisis.
Yeah, I was showing that.
And after seeing that, I'm like, okay, maybe this is the Silent Hill / Resident Evil game none of us have played. I'm not sure if you guys have played it, but
I have, and now I want to put it on the short list because it is one of those games, but instead of zombies, it's dinosaurs, and it's awesome.
It could happen.
It's
it could happen.
Survival horror meets Jurassic Park. What it
I
looks
mean,
like to
can
me.
you ask for more?
Yeah, I know. Sign me up for that.
So before we get deep into the conversation, remember everybody, we put out a brand new episode every Sunday. If you want to leave a 5-star rating, you can do so on Stitcher, Apple Podcast, all that good stuff. We also have the Discord. Huge shout out to everybody. It's become like a retro gaming collecting haven. Or Keith hates it because of that, right? Keith is like, no, man, you can't do that. But then Ryan's all in. If you want to see Ryan get his sexy physical digital copy, because he's got both. He's got both of these. But if you want to see the physical copy, you head over to acastofthepast.com/Discord. Is that right, Ryan?
Absolutely. A lot of great conversations going on there.
Indeed. I mean, check it out for those on the video version. And okay, I know the price. I know the price of this, but don't reveal it, Ryan. Don't reveal it, Ryan, because it is a topic, right? It's like whenever we go back to these consoles, it's the question of, do you do emulation, do you do digital, or buy the games? And somebody listening to this may be interested. So, Keith, I'm curious, how much do you think that physical copy, that CIB, complete inbox copy of Silent Hill 1 cost?
God, I don't even have a clue because I know physical game prices have just skyrocketed since the pandemic. So
throw something, man. Throw something out there.
I'm going to guess $45.
It's a little bit higher than that.
Okay, anything higher than that leads me to the question, why?
I know. It doesn't make sense because, so originally I played this game, I didn't play this game as a kid, Silent Hill. I got into it after it was recommended, and I went through kind of an old school video game binge like 10 years ago. So I ended up getting the digital download on the PlayStation 3. So that's the version I've typically played. But lately, because I've been on a game collecting addiction, I'll just call it what it is, right? I've wanted to get the complete physical editions of every Silent Hill game, and it's a really bad time to do this.
Yeah, that's like the worst
you might
time,
argue
right?
it's the worst time.
I've already paid over $100 for Silent Hill 3, which it's very hard to get. Thankfully, yeah.
Man, the face Keith just made is just like, dude, what the hell?
Thankfully, I own Silent Hill 2. I got it years ago, and I got it for $15. But this one here, Silent Hill 1, it cost me $70. And that's actually a good deal if you look on eBay right now. Most are going for around 80 plus. 80 to over $100. So
it's a good thing we try to have a clean podcast right now.
Yeah, I can't say what I'm thinking right now. I can't use the words that are in my head.
In order to have a healthy conversation before Keith breaks down here, naturally, we're going to be talking a lot about the story, and this is where I even told Ryan, it's like, look, Silent Hill games are not just deep in story, they're deep in lore. It's like the whole thing is an entire concept, but I'd like us to all initially just give our first impressions, starting with Keith and myself, because there's a reason we're talking about this game, right? It's like it's a Ryan-sponsored episode, if you will. So starting first with you, Keith, having played Silent Hill 2, knowing what we were kind of going to get into, what's your take on the first game?
It was, or actually, hold on, I've got some notes on it quickly. Actually, I just have one note, and my experience with this game was, this door is jammed, this door cannot be open. And that's about it. It was weird in the way that I almost feel like you have to have two conversations about this game, even more so about Silent Hill 2, because there's the gameplay of it, and then there's the story of it, where the gameplay I found to be frustrating for most of it, but the story I really enjoyed. And as weird as it sounds, it's honestly something that I think was accentuated about the fact that I watched the Silent Hill movie first, where I kind of had a rough idea of where they were going with it, and it compelled me continue playing it, because this is a game where I believe that most of the good stuff happens in the back half of the game, and it's a bit of a slog to get there. But once you get there, once it starts clicking, we're going a mile a minute with that one. And it took a while for me to enjoy it, maybe because the beginning was so gameplay heavy and not knowing where to go. It was a lot of just going through kind of samey looking corridors, trying to find the right door, the 1 out of 8 that are actually unlocked and don't give me that prompt that almost made me want to throw my controller into my TV.
He went to sleep just with that locked door sound.
It was funny because, like, comparing it to Resident Evil, at first I was thinking like, oh, that's weird that they don't do the loading door animation where they actually show it loading through the door. I thought that was weird, and I was going to make that a knock against the game. But by the time we got near the end of the game and I was just trying to find the right door out of them, I was so happy that they didn't have that, because just looking at that over and over would have driven me crazy. So it's just like a funny little thing about the game.
Would you say that watching the movie last year for review, did that help? Did that hurt? Like, knowing that there's a context, because obviously some things always change, but what's your take on that?
I actually think it helped my experience with Silent Hill 1, because I was able to kind of, like I mentioned, it compelled me through the story where I kind of knew where they were going and I knew what they were trying to accomplish with it, so it gave me the opportunity to see it through. And I remember Ryan mentioning that this is the better version of that story, which now on the other end I totally agree with. So it was cool to see this okay thing that I had consumed be even better at the end of it. So yeah, honestly, not having the weird order that we did, that I don't think anyone else should ever do, it actually made the gameplay experience of Silent Hill 1 better.
Do you mean watching the movie first?
Yeah, watching the movie first and then playing the game.
Yeah, because we went full back. We started from Silent Hill 2, the movie, and then this. And I actually have to agree, because I've said it in this podcast that even with some of the movies that we cover, they can be objectively bad, but it's like a curiosity piece, right? It's like, oh, go back to this movie, not because it's good, but because it gives you context. And especially with the Terminator films, I think we've fallen under that, right? With some of them. With this game, I feel like if I had played it first, because it was my first real Silent Hill experience, I would have felt like, ooh, this is really, really old and dated. And the fact that we played Resident Evil 2, 3, Silent Hill 2, and then going back to this, it's like, okay, I kind of get what I'm getting into. So even like, the tank controls, I got used to it in like 2 seconds. I actually think the only thing that hampered my experience is that I learned in Silent Hill 2 that just don't stop running and you're pretty much not going to get hurt. The moment that I remember that from 2, I immediately started doing that in this game, and I rarely died because of it. It's like very rarely that I use weapons, like unless I absolutely had to. And I don't think it hurt my experience, because I think I would have been way too impatient. Like what Keith said, this game is not a roller coaster, right? It doesn't start super high up and then go down and there's all of these waves. It sets up the whole concept of I'm here, I don't know what's happening. And because I had also watched the film, I'm like, okay, I'm curious to see if that's the route that we're going to go. And there are a lot of similarities. But much like Silent Hill 2, this is one of those games that I stop playing it, I go to bed, and I'm like, man, I like the attention to detail, because I think it's less special that you remember that it did come out after Resident Evil 2, after Resident Evil 3. So there's a lot of gaming that happened before this game on PS1. But I just love the fact that every nook and cranny in this game, with the exception of the locked doors, they all have a purpose. It's like they tell a story. And from the day and night cycle, I really enjoy my time with it. And here's going to be my closing thing before taking it to Ryan. I had this whole concept. It's like I couldn't help compare it to 2, right? We played it. It is impossible. Mm-hmm. And I always had this problem of like, I think I enjoy 2's gameplay and pacing more, but I actually enjoy this world more. Like there's a couple of things I just felt more like at ease in this. I don't know. I just felt more comfortable in this world, and I think I liked the experience just a little bit more, even if the gameplay is definitely not super archaic. And now with Ryan. Mm-hmm. Why, it's not going to be a question of do you like this game or not? The answer is yes, right? Why do you think this is a special game?
I think it's special for a lot of reasons because, again, this was Konami's answer to Resident Evil. But instead of just making a cheap knockoff, sure, it's, heavily inspired. I'm sure they were developing this during the time like post Resident Evil 2. So probably didn't take as much inspiration from maybe 3 and probably more so from Resident Evil 2. But they do a lot of things differently. Again, going for more psychological aspect. Really where this game wins is its music and its sound. It tries to make the most of that, and that's probably where they could get very creative, where graphical limitations are definitely a thing. Then taking advantage of things like sound is really where they can make the experience even more immersive. And there's something about this game that even like the crappy PS1 graphics in some ways make it creepier.
Yep.
I because
it's
like
the darkness and how they use it.
Yeah, like a lot of the lighting. Because I mean, like I said, for context, I first played this game, back in 2010, around that time. So this is me, it's 10 years after this game has come out. We've got PlayStation 3 HD graphics. I start playing this game in the middle of the night during like my winter break, and I actually end up shutting it off because I'm getting like creeped out. If you play this game alone in the dark, then it can still freak you out, even with these, PS1 graphics. When those first, the gray children, they look kind of like gingerbread men almost. Like getting attacked by those things the first time, scare the crap out of you.
So I just looked up a quick fact because I was curious. But apparently, according to Wikipedia, the development for Silent Hill started in September of 1996. So by that point, they weren't even looking to capture the Resident Evil phenomenon because, RE had barely come out at that point. So according to this, it was their attempt to make something that was big in the West and not really that RE inspired, which is interesting.
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm curious to see if, as time went on, they drew inspiration from it, because I think they might have gone through kind of a couple different ideas before, like, finalizing it. So at that point, they might have been drawing more inspiration from Resident Evil through kind of the long development
especially
cycle.
Like, let's not forget that this did not come out at the same time as Resident Evil 2. It came out at the same time as RE3, which is very, like, action-heavy. So it's not even that this is, like, a psychological game. It's, like, the pacing mismatch between these two games is, like, definite. And I'd like to start that off with you, Keith. It's like, when we talked about RE3, we mentioned that game is shorter in comparison to the second one. The pacing is very different, right? It's a lot more action heavy. It's a lot more about the weapons. In contrast to this game, which like really takes it back. I mean, there's like a lot of ammo, right? But generally speaking, you don't have to focus on the weapons. Do you think like would this have been something you enjoyed back then as opposed to RE3?
Honestly, probably not. Just because having played RE2 to death back in the day, and that's what I expected from the survival horror franchise, I've always leaned to the more action side of things, and I think Silent Hill was something that I would have just bounced right off of because it is a slower pace. It's more about exploration and puzzles than actual combat, because I think combat is one of the worst parts of this game, even though it is like, hey, much like Silent Hill 2 versus the Resident Evil games at the time, it's cool that you can move and that you can kick enemies. It's definitely an upgrade from the combat of Resident Evil 2, but I still think that the Resident Evil series does it better, where it just feels nicer and there's momentum and stuff behind the actual gun usage in this game, and they kind of accepted the fact that, hey, we can't really do melee well, so let's not include it. And just those things wrapped up, I think I would have bounced off Silent Hill very hard.
Yeah, Silent Hill, and I think it might just be a thing where it is kind of, not to take away from Resident Evil, but it's more of like a, I don't have the right word, but since it is a more cerebral thing, it might be something when you're younger you just wouldn't appreciate. Like it's more
100%.
like I don't want to say like adult experience, but it is something where it's, you know, it's not just your straight to the action kind of thing.
And you're right, because I just wanted to say quickly, I even wrote this to both of you on the Discord, which was like, I'm actually glad I played this now, not back then, because I wouldn't have gone this game. I would have grabbed the controller and be like, I don't get it. It's foggy. It's like, there's like, where's the girl? Like, I'm used to action oriented. Playing it now, I'm like, okay, I'm getting it. It's like you can begin to speculate, and that if you're not curious about a story, if you're not creative in your head about that, I just don't think this would be the type of game for you.
Yeah, and talking about the combat a little bit, it was, you know, by design meant to be kind of easier, and, you know, obviously you're not gonna, you know, Harry's aim sucks because you're playing as like an average Joe. They kind of made it purposely a little bit more clunky. Resident Evil, you're always playing as some kind of like special ops person or whatever. So
first day on the job cop Leon S. Kennedy.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, but I mean, he's doing like flips and shit.
He got some training.
You know, he's got some training.
He passed cop school.
Yeah, but otherwise, you know, you're like the everyman in Silent Hill. So it's meant to be, they didn't make combat as big of a focus, and they also made it a little bit easier on you, but it's also going to be a little bit clunkier in the same way because you're not supposed to be this big tough guy action hero.
I also, and maybe this is just a me thing, but I also found the design of enemies to really play a big role in that as well, where like this versus Resident Evil, they kind of establish the rules of your enemies pretty quick in Resident Evil. Slow zombies, fast dogs, everything is everything kind of has its pattern to it, where especially when you're roaming around the town, things kind of feel like so random and sporadic, and especially like the incarnate of that to me is the flying enemies, where they'll just come after you and there's no really way to like figure out their patterns and stuff. They're either going to hit you or they're not, and it doesn't feel like, I don't think fair's the right word, but it doesn't feel
the pterodactyls
right.
are annoying as hell.
Yeah, you just got to zigzag. They'll never get you.
That's what I do, is I just zigzag, and I think there's a reason they didn't put as much emphasis on flying enemies in any future Silent Hill games.
Yeah.
Like you notice in 2,
it was a bad idea.
Yeah, in 2 there's no enemies like that, and yeah, I'm happy that they got rid of them. Yeah. They're annoying.
So I wanted to make sure that we first just got some general context to be like, okay, this is where the three of us kind of are. So now let's begin to get a little bit more into the weeds. So Ryan, could you try to summarize what the story of Silent Hill is all about?
Yeah, to go to the real high level story before, I'm sure we'll get into like the real nitty gritty details later. Harry Mason is the typical everyman, and he's visiting the vacation town of Silent Hill with his daughter. So they're driving into town. As they're driving, there's a police officer who's, you know, driving alongside of him, and then Harry sees like this girl in the middle of the road. He swerves, crashes his car, and when he wakes up, his daughter's missing. So the whole journey is him trying to find his daughter. So you're getting clues kind of throughout the journey to eventually find the daughter. And you run into some characters along the way, and then things get a little crazy with some spooky cult stuff, and kind of finalizing in this kind of big encounter at the end. But I'm sure we can get in. That's the basic gist. There's a lot more that goes into that, but I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, so there's two stories to the game. One is exactly what you mentioned, which is the plot of just like, hey, I need to find my girl. But they use that as an excuse to have the story be about Silent Hill. And obviously, people, like, there will be spoilers. It is impossible to have a natural, genuine conversation about this without that. Despite that, I do think that the ride is fun, right? I'm going to leave the more spoiler-heavy things in just a second, but the whole concept is like, hey, we're in this vacation place, but it's completely isolated. All the people are gone with the exception of a few interesting individuals, let's call them like that. So the story becomes of Harry just wondering, okay, like, my girl's lost here, but like, what the hell is even happening here? And in the process, there are some cycles where sometimes, like, a school looks like a school, a hospital looks like a hospital. When you're walking down the street, it looks traditionally like that. But then all of a sudden, you hear a siren, things change, and things take a very literal dark turn. And that's where you get like the super creepy part, from the sound to the characters, the enemy, just everything about it. And it's this whole concept of what is real, what is not. So in your case, Keith, I do think it's fairly similar in style to the second one. What did you think about that for this first game?
Honestly, I felt like the game kind of did a poor job explaining all of that. I felt like I knew what was going on, especially with like the real world versus nightmare, only because I played Silent Hill 2 originally, where it's especially early on. Like, I will admit later on it gets a heck of a lot better and it ends up wrapping up everything nicely. But going early in the game, you're kind of left going like, well, what's going on? Okay, I guess now I knew from playing Silent Hill 2, like, okay, I'm in the brown area. Now I'm in the that means I'm in the nightmare area. And it left it feeling a little aimless, especially at the beginning. And I wasn't a big fan of it. It's one of those games where I feel like, and Silent Hill 2 is a positive example of this, and I feel like this is a bit of a negative one, where you need to look up things around the game in order to fully understand why things are happening in it.
Yes, I will say there's a lot of supplemental information about these games, and if you don't read like every single note and remember every single thing that you read or whatever in the game, it is difficult to piece the story together. It's very obtuse, and it's one of those games where you do have to do a bunch of reading afterwards to kind of make sense of the whole story. So I totally lend that. It's interesting though, because I remember I had to explain in the last podcast the kind of the other world concept a little bit more, because the way that they handle it in Silent Hill 2 is a little bit more different to how it's handled in the other games. Because in Silent Hill 2, once you get to the hospital, you eventually kind of enter the other world and you stay in it for a while, and then you kind of come out of it, and you kind of go into it like one more time and then the game ends. Whereas it's a little bit more structured in this game, where you do the school in the normal world, and then you do the school in the other world, and then you go to the hospital in the normal world, and then you do the hospital in the other world. So it's kind of like
more structured, but it's not explained, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, it's not, I think it's supposed to be a little bit more, it's supposed to be a little bit like of a mystery that you kind of have to piece together yourself. Like they don't give you the direct explanations. But again, the supplemental information, which I agree it's kind of a downside, but also it's fun to have something to read afterwards to kind of understand more. So it's a little bit of plus and minus there. But I actually like how it is structured in this game. I think the way that they handle the school really lets you know like what this is. It's like, okay, I'm in the same place, but things look different, and certain rooms I didn't get to before, I can get to now, and certain rooms I was in before, different things are happening here. And I just thought that was really cool. You think about games like A Link to the Past that use kind of that like dual world mechanic. I thought this was a really cool way of doing it.
No, same thing. I think overall, I really enjoyed the differences because to me, the question was always, as Ryan mentioned, things change. So what can I access now that I otherwise couldn't? There was one part where you're in this locker area and then a cat comes out, but then the world changes and you hear the same sound. And it's like, that's brilliant game design because this game's
that
like,
was really
the
good.
sound is the main attraction of this game. And I don't think it gets enough credit because I think if you played this game in mute, like completely silent, it's like no pun intended, it will be a completely different experience. Because when I went there, I'm like, what am I going to find, right? And I'm not going to get too much into the weeds.
It's like a deja vu sort of effect. It's like, I've been here before, I did this, but you know something's going to be different
and
this
even
time.
The character, even Harry is sometimes like, okay, what's happening? It's like, am I dreaming? Is this really happening? Because it feels like after a couple times, he wakes up in a different area. And I really enjoyed that. The thing with me, and this is
Did you crap your pants when the thing came out of the locker?
Like, I mean, even with the cat, because it's like, look, I've said it before. As much as I enjoy talking about these games with you, both of you know, like horror games, totally not my thing. There's a reason I stream most of these games online. Like, this is the first time that like I played 100% of this offline to be like, okay, Juan, get into the experience. I actually turned down my lights. And I had to play this game in chunks because it's like I'm playing with like a pretty beefy sound system with a subwoofer. So whenever, especially there's like some hallways towards the end of the game and those thuds, like there's like these uncomfortable sounds. I had to pause every 5 minutes. I'm like, nope. And I knew usually nothing happened, but the sound design is always like, what if something happens now? The part of this game that me as a gamer, I realize it's not for me, so I'm not knocking against it, right? It's just like a preferential thing is Resident Evil is a lot more literal. Resident Evil is pretty obvious. It's like you got to do a puzzle, but there's a lot more logical visual things about it. Silent Hill is very different. Silent Hill is like psychological. It's a lot more about the notes. It's like I kind of don't get what's happening, and that is what the game is. In my case, like full transparency, I had to look up a couple of things because I got stuck a lot in this game because I realized, oh, I got to read this note and this, and like this is like I got to remember this. And I'm like, my attention span for a video game has never been the best at that. So I felt like tied into that. But I can imagine somebody, and I'm going to ask this to you directly, Ryan, and then Keith, it's like, anybody that loves like figuring out puzzles and getting into like the real weeds of the story, I'm like, man, that's freaking rich. Was that something back in 2010 when you first played it, Ryan, and now is that an appeal for you to the game?
I do like the puzzles, but even for me, sometimes they can get pretty complicated. Especially certain things like even playing through again, talking about the school. I couldn't remember how to unlock the piano, right? Because you can't do the piano puzzle right away. So I'm like, okay, I got the other medallion. Why is the piano not open? And then it turns out you have to put the other medallion in first before you can do. I'm like, oh, that's one of those things like playing Zelda and stuff. Normally it's like you collect all the things and then you go over and turn it in or whatever, or other games you're used to getting all the pieces before you need to go over there. So that kind of slipped my mind. But the piano puzzle is definitely pretty difficult, and it's not like obvious that when you're pushing the keys, some don't make noise and some do. So how, like, you figure the ones that do make noise are supposed to be the ones you're supposed to hit and not the ones that don't. But once I remembered, and again, a lot of this is just going off of like playing it previously. So it is very difficult if you don't know it. It's like once I remembered, it's the ones that don't make noise, I was able to figure out the whole story of that piano puzzle very easily. But no, I mean, I even find some of these pretty challenging, and there were times when I played it back then that like certain areas where I did have to look it up because it was just a little bit too obscure, and I felt like there was something I was missing.
In your case, Keith, from a pacing perspective, did you find yourself kind of like me, where you were just lost? And I think that's part of the game, right? Like, let's be full real. This is a short game. So the average beat time of this is between 5 to 8 hours. So, like, it took me, and I get lost every 5 seconds, like between 7 to 8 hours, which is a miracle for me. I'm like, holy crap. I mean, that is like excellent. But it is also a testament to they want you to experience the world, not just get from point A to point B. But in your case, Keith, how did you feel with that pacing combined with the puzzles and then maybe all the hints and pieces?
I'm very much like you, Juan, that way, where I get the fact that they're trying to build an atmosphere, but I don't think that there comes a point where you can't just like excuse gameplay flaws and call it atmosphere. Like, especially around the hospital time is when I started relying heavily on a guide, mostly because all of the corridors are kind of samey, and especially in the nightmare world, it's all felt very the same, and that was the part of the game that I really felt like pretty much frustration about there only being 1 or 2 doors that like open, and the rest of them are jammed and cannot be opened, and I will see that message in my head until the day I die now. But yeah, I think that this game could have done a lot more if it was a little more streamlined, and I understand that style appeals to some people, but for me it's very much like point and click adventure games, and why they don't appeal to me, because it's a scenario where you're presented with an area and it's just about finding that exact point to click on the screen to progress forward. And there was a couple of areas in Silent Hill where I felt exactly that, where you're just trying to find that exact combination of things that isn't really obvious all the time, and just to get to that one room where the progression lives, and having a guide for things like that. I think I honestly, this is a game that I probably enjoyed more because I just threw in the towel and used a guide to help me get through it.
And I think that's fine, because the actual experience, it's like, I did it too, right? There came a point in time where I try really hard, and I'm like, I know for a fact that I don't have.
That made me so mad with the guide.
There's a couple of parts in the game, like
really?
The VCR.
What about, like, do you even have to do the VCR?
I don't think you have to do it, but I was sitting there like trying to figure out where to progress next, and trying to figure out what the heck to do with that cassette tape, and then finding it out later that it was, that's just this VCR that's in a random room that you get get the text for.
For me, the part that really gave me a headache
with that cassette
is the rubber ball. The fact that it's like, no, you got to go to the rooftop. And you have to, it's like this little corner that, look, I played this on an emulator, so it's relatively clean. And I'm just like, what the hell do I do with the stupid ball? I'm like, I got to go to that little ass corner that you can barely see, put the ball there, and then I got to go over here, turn on the thing, so the water like pushes it in a certain way that the key falls down, and then I got to go to the first floor. I'm like, dude. Like, first of all, like, wow, well done for anybody that thought that. But no, luckily it was the exception, not the rule. But I'm going to ask Keith a question here, because now that we've played Silent Hill 2, right, you've talked about streamlining. Having played the second one, do you think they did a better job at articulating some of the ins and outs of the puzzle pieces, or do you think that's kind of just the style at the end of the day?
Honestly, I think it's just the style, because they did do a lot of streamlining between Silent Hill 1 and 2, but when I'm thinking about examples, it's mostly with story stuff and defining the atmosphere of the town and the story. When it comes to puzzle stuff, like, yes, it's a little more obvious, yes, it's a little more in your face, but it is very going out of your way, trying to figure out where to go, and then finding that one space where the progression continues. So I don't know, I can't speak to if it stays that way in later Silent Hill games. That would be a question for Ryan that I would ask, but maybe that's just not my style.
Right. It's pretty through the first 3 games, it pretty much stays pretty consistent. The only thing that they kind of streamlined was you can combine items, I think, in Silent Hill 2, and that's where you had to do that one MacGyver thing to get to that hatch. The horseshoe and the candle wax and all that. Yeah, that's about the only difference. Otherwise, it's relatively the same. But I could see with like the PS1 graphics, like seeing some of those things. But yeah, what I will say is I appreciate the puzzles in Silent Hill 1. There is the object puzzles, but talking more to like the piano puzzles and like some of the ones with where you had to do the number of limbs on the characters or whatever.
Yeah, some of them are really cool. Like that light one at the end of the game is awesome.
Yeah, those ones where it makes you feel smart when you solve them, whereas I feel like some puzzles in other survival horror games is kind of like, oh, I got the 4 pieces, I just put them on the door and call it a day. I like that in this game, when you got those blocks, you actually had to figure out based on the story, like where to put the green block versus the blue block and the red. So I like that it kind of takes it to that next level, and when you do figure it out, you do feel smart. But also a smart thing that they did in Silent Hill 2 was if you're not that type of person, you could put the puzzles to easy.
Mm-hmm. That is
right.
Cool.
It's the only game they did that. I think in Silent Hill 3 they just went back to standard difficulty. So
what does
I don't
that
know
actually
why.
change in Silent Hill 2?
Yeah,
Did we ever establish
it does
that?
make it I've never done the easy puzzles, but it just makes them, I think they're just much more straightforward, where if you had to put like
hit a button,
if you had to put like 3 blocks on something, you would just put them in and call it a day. It wouldn't be like some story with it or whatever. And I've never done the hard mode puzzles either, but it would be interesting to try those out.
The one thing I'll really give this game credit for, and this is like a for better or worse thing, is that a lot of games, and this is even like Mass Effect, it's like any game that has kind of like puzzle pieces, you kind of know. It's like once you get the first one, it's like, oh, okay, so all the puzzles in the game are going to follow this exact same format. Not so much with this game. It's like almost every puzzle, it's like you bring up the piano, but then there's the little things like not necessarily a puzzle, but eventually there's a key, but like the key's like electrified. So you're like, okay, I got to do something else to get access to this key. And then there's another part where you got to turn these cranks so that way you get access to a specific room. There's other ones that you got to look at a specific number and put those, or you got to mark these buttons in a way that it makes a shape in according to a picture. So I really applaud this game for not doing 2 types of puzzles. It almost felt like every single time I could feel the game designer go like, I just don't want to do the same thing because it would be repetitive. Because at the end of the day, like this is the gameplay loop. Keith mentioned it. It's like the action part of the game is a gateway for the story and for the puzzle pieces. And with that, it's like, I would like to dedicate this time now because we've dedicated over 30 minutes already to this game without talking about the thing. And I think that's by design because let's get to the characters first. I think that's the next logical step. So, Ryan, as the resident Silent Hill fan here, how would you like to go about this? Because there's so many places I feel I wouldn't do it justice going to the next place.
I wonder if we get into the real meat of the story, because I think some of the characters won't make sense until we kind of get into the context. So I guess I'd first ask, how confused are you guys about this story? Like, do you want me to just give you the nitty gritty on it? And
okay, I'm
you guys
curious.
can ask
Keith,
questions.
When the credits rolled, What was your thought? Like, give me your reaction. I want to see if it's the same as mine.
My thought once the credits rolled were like, yeah, okay, I guess it's kind of similar to the Silent Hill movie.
Same thing. My thought process is like, some weird stuff happens. Like that last part of the game, it's like, holy crap. I mean, I felt like it was like a Dragon Ball Z fight about to unfold with some like lights and stuff, but then it ends fairly normal within that. And I was like, I'm not smart enough to understand what's happening.
Yeah, there is multiple endings, and we don't know what ending Keith got, but we can get to that. So, okay, here's what happens in a nutshell. I'll try to explain this as best I can. Alessa, who is this young girl, she is really at the crux of this entire story. She is this young girl who's born with psychic powers. Her mother is Dahlia Gillespie. She belongs to this weird cult that it kind of operates within the town. Because of Alessa's psychic powers, her mother, this fanatic, thinks that she is like this chosen one or whatever, and they choose her to do this ritual to birth the god of their cult, called like the Order is what they're known as. So what ends up happening is during this ritual, there's not a consensus on what actually happens. They say there's a newspaper clipping says there's like a boiler explosion, but other people speculate that Alessa was burned alive as part of the ritual. Either way, the house goes up in flames, and Alessa somehow survives this. But to prevent the cult from continuing to birth their god, she splits her soul. And that part of her soul goes away and like somehow turns into this baby on the side of a road that Harry Mason finds. And then this is a 7-year gap to when now the game starts, and Cheryl is that other half of Alessa, and she's kind of resummoned in a way to the town. And that's why she kind of runs off on her own, and Harry can't find her, is because she's trying to reconnect with Alessa. And then throughout the game, it's kind of this cat and mouse between Dahlia and Alessa. Dahlia is really kind of using Harry as a tool to kind of bring Alessa and Cheryl together so that they can help.
She's basically Liquid Snake.
Yeah, essentially.
That's a pretty easy way to put it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if Keith tries to like crap on how weird this story is, I'm just gonna be like nanomachines and your crazy MGS
and I got
stuff.
Nothing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really like the main thing around this story is that they're like Dahlia wants them to be rejoined to birth the god, but Alessa's also trying to rejoin herself so that she can like, and it's really sad, she's trying to basically rejoin so that she can die to prevent this ritual from taking place. So it's really a sad position to be in. She's in constant pain, and Alessa basically, with kind of the combination of the town of Silent Hill, which we learn a lot in Silent Hill 2, is kind of like its own character and has its own kind of power behind it. But because Alessa is basically in constant pain, she's been burned alive, her nightmare and everything is what's like consuming the town. So that's why the other world is like this burnt, charred place, because it's like representative of like her torture. And all the enemies are a kind of a reflection of either fears or just parts of Alessa's childhood, all just kind of manifesting themselves in the town. So that is like the high level explanation, and we can kind of go from there.
I just got to say, Ryan, you sound so sexy when you explain things. I'm just listening to you. I'm like, oh,
man,
okay.
That's a man that knows his stuff.
I hope things were a little bit. I hope that clears up a little bit more of the game, because they don't make it obvious with the whole like soul splitting thing. Like, Cheryl and Alessa are connected in some way, but it's kind of hard to piece it together.
They don't make it obvious at first, but one thing that I will give this game a ton of credit for is by the end of it, all of that made sense to me. Once you get into the back half of the game, I do think that they do a very good job explaining everything that's going on. Like, even the whole soul-splitting thing, I understood that by the end of it, with that scene where there's like low pixel burning Alyssa along with the ghost Cheryl right beside each other. Like, I got that, okay, those are two of the same being together. And even with the Nightmare Town, I think they do a really good job of, like, when Harry has that like epiphany moment where he's understanding that, like, oh, things are starting to merge together, and now the nightmare is becoming reality and they're becoming one thing. They do a really good job of hand-holding the story near the end of it so that everything is crystal clear. I think for myself, the only exception to that would be the Kaufman character, where I still don't understand what he was, but everything else I got by the end of it.
Yeah, and I want to put a pause on that character because I know there's some like optional stuff. So I want to give like my reaction to this first is what Keith said. What I loved about Harry as the game progressed is that he started becoming a lot more aware, and the fact that he flat out says it, right? As Keith mentioned, it's like, hey, things are beginning to combine, and every time he wakes up, quote unquote, he kind of gets more upset. It's like, what the hell is happening? To the point that he's becoming a lot more upset. And in a weird way, he almost cares a little bit less about his daughter. I'm not saying he doesn't care about her, but it's like there's this nagging thing of like, just can somebody please clarify, like, who the hell is Dahlia? And I feel they did a pretty decent job of getting Harry to feel the way we did. The only nitpick, and this is a problem with a lot of games in this time, is I wonder if the script could have taken this to another level, because something that was surprising to me, and it's worth pointing because it's a story element, in many ways, I found the voiceover in this game to be almost slightly better performed than the second game, and it's
you don't
weird.
even have to say slightly. This game
Why
is
is
miles better than Silent Hill 2.
That's I find that interesting. I think, and a lot of people complain about not necessarily that the voice actors are bad, but it just kind of comes across as awkward. But I think it kind of works with the shitty PS1 graphics and the style. And also it just kind of adds to the eeriness because like the PS1, like you can feel it loading each audio file individually. Cause it's like you get Harry's like radio. What's going on with that radio? And that there's just long pauses in between the dialogue, but it kind of works, like it just adds to the like creepy atmosphere of the game. So I don't know. Like I said, I think the lines like are delivered fine. It's just obviously it doesn't have a natural flow to it just because the PS1 limitations.
Even though I love the game, it's also part of the my belief that the James character in Silent Hill 2 is the worst voice acted character in video game history.
Really?
It was pretty bad. Like I remember, if there's
maybe
one
you
thing
guys will like the HD version better.
Oh man! But if there's one thing I clearly remember about our previous, like our Silent Hill 2 review, it's like that's the first thing that sticks out to me. It's like every time he spoke, I'm like, dude, you're killing me here. It's like, come on, man. It's one thing to be a mediocre voice actor. So that's like, it was so weird to me. I'm like, why is the first game's voice acting definitely better? It was like, I was not minding it.
I don't necessarily feel that way, like I said, because of the pauses and stuff, but I get how it kind of works within the context of the game.
Now, I am curious. So we've laid out a couple of the characters. There's two in particular that we haven't gotten to yet, but if the question was which character you enjoyed watching, it's the one that whenever they were part of a cutscene or something, you're like, okay, we're getting somewhere. I'm enjoying this. Starting with Keith, which character would you say? Because we have from Harry to the cop and Sybil. We have Lisa, which I really need Ryan to give me a little bit more context about Lisa later.
Sure.
Kaufman.
Ooh, let me try this one because she was my favorite. So Lisa is a character where, in my opinion, she had the best arc in the game, where she's a character that you find in the nightmare world unconscious, and she kind of becomes the kind of like a pillar for Harry going through the game. Like whenever he has a question or he needs direction, Lisa's kind of there and sends him in that direction. And they don't really bring it up at first, but they slowly bring it up more and more through the game goes on. But Lisa's in the nightmare world, and she doesn't really know why that is. And eventually, through like a couple of plot details, like her feeling like she's not allowed to leave the hospital and feeling cold, you end up with the big reveal that, well, she's been dead the entire time. She was murdered. And then she turns into the same as every other enemy that you fought in the hospital before your eyes, bringing out the, like, giving a more understanding of the why those monsters the way they are. It led to, like, basically all the doctors and nurses that were that helped Alessa in her treatment was like the incarnate of those monsters, and Lisa was one of those. And that arc I thought was great, and it wasn't like it was a very subtle thing that happened throughout the game that wasn't like story defining. It just kind of happened, and I appreciated it. How well did I do there?
You nailed it. 10 out of 10.
Yes.
10 out of 10. And yeah, and that's actually one of the coolest like scenes in the game when you have the cutscene of her like transforming into.
Holy crap! That was deep. It was one of the parts of the game that I'm
PS1.
like, man.
It is, and it's cool because it was a contrast to where most of the CG, I guess you could call it CG cutscenes beforehand, featured her, and in like a very like caring kind of way or like confused kind of way, and then she just starts bleeding from her skull and transforming. It was nuts.
Yeah, and I got a fun fact on the cutscenes a little bit later, but yeah, that is completely Lisa in a nutshell. She was the main caretaker for Alessa after she was burned, and Kaufman, kind of to segue into him, he was like basically the director for that Alchemilla hospital where you know, the hospital you play through, and he also had this like drug trafficking kind of thing he was doing on the side. But essentially he had Lisa basically addicted to drugs and kind of blackmailed her into treating Alessa and not being able to say anything to anyone. So she had a very tragic situation, and she does eventually die. I don't know if they ever explain how she dies, but it's not super important, but just that she has a very kind of tragic situation, and and then she's basically stuck in the nightmare world because she is one of like Alessa's memories.
I really loved Lisa as a character. Like the whole time in the game, I'm just like, man, forget about the whole like where's the girl and Dolly and the other ones. I love that they added this character that in the grand scheme of the story, she doesn't actually change anything, right? Because she was the caregiver for Alessa, as you mentioned, but the story's not about Lisa yet. They use her as a glue to give you like another context of like other people in Silent Hill that were affected. And that part I like because a lot of games kind of go dry where it's like, hey, here's the main story. The world's empty. Like there's nothing else. But she gives you a glimpse of like all these other people. And like that part was deep when she said that like she feels like she can't leave the hospital. I'm like, okay, I get it. But I felt the desperation because she didn't know who she was. Like it's like she died.
Yeah,
right?
she didn't
but
remember everything
aware.
at first. Yeah,
exactly. And I really, really love that. So where do you think we should go from here? Because Kaufman, so I did a couple of things in this game that you told me were optional, and honestly, I didn't know. Like I did them because I'm like,
so
hey,
there's multiple endings.
Does one of them straight up say, well, this was a waste of my time? Because that pissed me off.
Now, yeah, so there's 4 different endings you can get. Essentially, there's the bad ending, the bad plus ending, I think, the good ending, and the good plus ending.
Could you try to summarize which one? Because I got the good plus.
So you got good plus. So essentially there is after you come out of the sewers, there is a side quest you can do with Dr. Kaufman where you rescue him at a bar. He's getting attacked by an enemy, and you kind of go through a couple different things, and you end up finding like this weird red stuff like off of a motorcycle eventually, and then Kaufman like interrupts you. But essentially saving Dr. Kaufman is what gives you either the good. If you save him, you get the good ending. If you don't save him, you get the bad ending. So Keith, did you do that side quest?
Yes, I did. And then I talked to him in the motorcycle, like near the motorcycle, and that's when that's when Henry was like, yeah, this is a waste of my time. That felt great. But I had to look it up.
What are you doing goofing off?
Yeah, exactly. I looked it up when you mentioned it, and apparently I got the good ending.
So you did not save Sybil?
No, I ended up fighting Sybil. I didn't realize that was something that could happen, which is cool.
This is a little bit more obscure, and actually I think technically the canonical ending is actually the ending you got, Keith, where Sybil is not saved. But this is something I got the worst ending the first time I played this game, because I beelined straight to like the boathouse or whatever. I never did the Kaufman side quest, and I never got the stuff. But basically, before you go into the nightmare world at the hospital, you can find a bottle in the kitchen, and then you find that red liquid on the ground. So if you scoop up some of the red liquid, you can then use that on Sybil to save her. Like it gets rid of the demon thing inside of her. Because if you notice at the end of the game, like Kaufman took the red stuff from you. It's called like Alga Faudus or something. It has some weird name to it. But anyway, he throws that at Alessa at the end, and it like exorcises the demon. Like that's why like you get that the demon god at the end as the final boss, because it's like it finally like comes out of Alessa. Now if you don't save Kaufman, then that never happens, and you fight like this weird glowy Alessa as the final boss of the game. So there's actually two different final bosses. They both are essentially the same boss fight. They just look aesthetically different. And the bad ending is a kind of Harry was dead the whole time kind of thing, where you kill like the Alessa boss or whatever, but then you just see Harry like stuck in the nightmare world and everything's falling apart, and then it cuts to a cutscene of him like dead in his car where the car crashed, and that's how it ends. And you're just like,
oh, that's bullcrap.
You're just like, oh, what the hell?
Yeah, but that's like the cheapest. This all never happened.
So I was like, what? When I first played the game, and then I immediately went on YouTube to look up the other endings because I was like, this is bullshit.
So I'm curious here, because this is a conversation that we've had. We did an episode a little while ago about decisions in games and how much they matter or not. And here we see like there is a definitive difference from all the way to he was dead the whole time. It's like, oh my goodness, to hey, things turn out fairly okay, to the point that a key character in Sybil could be dead or alive. Do you both like the fact that this game gives you all these alternate scenarios that are quite dramatic? Is that something you enjoy?
It is cool, and it was something that I didn't realize that there was alternate endings until this conversation, because especially a lot in games these days, you are given like the most literal choice of, okay, if you do this, you are going to get one ending, but if you do this other thing, you are going to get the other ending, and you know when that is happening. But the fact that there's little hidden things that are easy to miss that can contribute to what you get, I think that's a really cool feature that more things should have done. And I know they expanded on that in Silent Hill 2, because wasn't there like 5 or 6 different endings in 2?
Yeah, there is multiple endings, and of course the original. This also, much like the second game, They have like funny endings too. There's like a
UFO.
Is there? Yeah. There is a UFO. I think every game has a UFO ending.
Do they have the talking dog or whatever it was?
No, that was Silent Hill 2 had one of the best ones with the dog. I forget what other Silent Hill. I don't know if there's an additional ending besides the UFO ending in the first game, but that one you can only get in like the New Game Plus, basically the second playthrough. But I do think this game is one of the more like consequence driven endings where I feel like James's story in Silent Hill 2 is just kind of like told and the ending almost doesn't really matter. Whereas the ending of Silent Hill 1 actually has big consequences, as you see, like with Silent Hill 3 being a direct sequel to it. So I think that the ending feels a little bit more important where either way in Silent Hill 2, it's like, I feel like what you get no matter what at the end with James's story kind of fits, except for some of the more offbeat ones that are like the more joke endings or whatever. So I do feel like the endings are a little bit more important in this game.
So in my case, something I wanted to touch up on now is just generally speaking, some of the standouts or favorite things about the game. Starting with me, what I really liked is like it's the little details. So I figured out that when you turn off the lights, a lot of the enemies can't see you. So it makes it even easier depending the situation, especially in the hospital. You can kind of just like walk around, not really have to kill a lot of enemies. But I'm like, wait a minute, I got a key, but I can't use it on the damn door. And it's because in some places it's like, you need to turn on the light. And it logically makes sense, right? He can't look at the map unless he has the flashlight on. And it's like those little things that it's very insignificant. Let's be real, like there's no real consequence. It takes you like a second to turn on the light. But I like the fact that it's like, oh man, okay, I got to turn it on. But if I turn it on, then they're going to see me.
There's a
so I got to be careful.
There. And yeah, it's true. It's a nice little detail where, hey, if you're going to have the convenience, and it's a little bit easier to see in this game in the dark than it is in Silent Hill 2. I felt it was like Silent Hill 2 felt way darker. But it's a nice thing where it's like, hey, if you want to avoid enemies with the flashlight, well, there is a trade-off there. You're not going to be able to use the map without turning the light on. And the map is a huge crutch in this game, which is kind of a nice challenge that they give you at the end where there is no map and you got to remember where to go. But definitely, I love little things in this game, like when you're in the hospital and it's before the Nightmare Hospital, it's just a regular hospital, and you've checked every single door, and you go to like the third floor, and the door's locked, and you're like, what the hell? I just checked everything. Then you go in the elevator, and what's there? Magically there's a fourth floor that wasn't there before, and you're like, oh, you clever bastard.
Same thing with one of the rooms where you leave, and I'm like, wait a minute, this hallway is a little bit longer than I remember it being. And the problem with the game though is that if it took longer to load, I'm like, something's changing. You're doing some of them things. Yeah,
like the school. When you're in the nightmare version of the school, one of the bathrooms actually, when you come out, you go up a floor, which might throw you off for a minute. And I know in the nowhere world at the end, there's one random door that takes you up a floor.
Yeah. So what about you, Keith? What's your favorite takeaway or something that just really stuck out for you?
You brought it up earlier, Juan, but a thing that I want to give a lot of credit to is the ambiance of this game and the sound, where I think they just did it masterfully, where a lot of games will, like, Silent Hill is a game where I loved the sound of it, but I would not go listen to the soundtrack of it, because most of the times the fact that they didn't use music in places, I think, accentuated the environment of the game more, where it was banging or there was just creepy carnival music once you got to the carnival near the end of the game, or the fact that it was this like low, almost annoying humming sound that almost like you just wanted to get out of it and it was putting you on edge. They did a wonderful job with all of that, and even with the monsters and the creatures and the grunts and sounds that they would make that would leave you on edge. It is wonderful with sound, and it just nailed that so well.
It really did. And here's the thing. So Silent Hill 1 and 2 are not directly connected, but 3 is. So Ryan, without like spoiling, right? But from a mechanical standpoint, do you think that Silent Hill 3 is a step up from this game?
Yeah, definitely. The story-wise, I think Silent Hill 3, of the first 3 games, the story of Silent Hill 3 may not be my favorite, but some of the things that they do in terms of psychological horror, I think, is really, really good in Silent Hill 3. And obviously with the PS2, they could do a lot more than the PS1. So I'll just say that there's some areas from Silent Hill 1 that you revisit in Silent Hill 3 that they take to a way cooler level.
Nice.
One of which I'll say outright is the amusement park, and I think they do some really cool stuff with that. So that's a little sneak preview for next year,
Yeah.
It's definitely worth playing, and it's like I said, a nice continuation of the story. And I'm if you guys, it seems like you were interested in this story, I think you'll wanna tackle that game eventually too.
I do want to tackle that game eventually too,
and we will on a Cast of the Past. I mean, podcast ain't quite done this episode yet because I wanted to quickly. Just to give everybody some context. So usually I start the episodes with, the chronological order of games or something, but I think there's like some really cool things to just explain. It's like even Ryan said, maybe after 3 we kind of don't necessarily keep going, and I know that's like heavily debated, but just for context here, I'm also going to bring it up on the video version. So Silent Hill 1 came out in 1999. Interestingly enough, and I didn't know this is from giantbomb.com, so my source. In 2001, they released a play novel of Silent Hill 1 for the Game Boy Advance in Japan. Which, like, Ryan, have you played that or seen it?
No, I don't. I don't know if people have done like a ROM hack that's translated in English, but like you said, it's in Japanese, so I don't know if there's a way to play. Yeah,
on the GBA.
But there's some things that like you can read on the wikis that were kind of extracted from it, but I have not played it.
So Silent Hill 2 came out in 2001. Interestingly enough, a couple of months after, in Europe they released Silent Hill 2 Relentless Dreams, which is an updated version.
Restless
Relentless.
I think that was also the Xbox version of Silent Hill 2,
right.
I want to say.
Did you? I forget. I think I asked you this before. Did you play that one?
No, they have. It's basically the same game, but they have like a prologue where you play as Maria. But I've never actually done it.
Okay.
Interesting. So in 2003, Silent Hill 3 came out. In 2004, Silent Hill 4 came out, and I played the demo of that. And when Ryan told me maybe we stop at 3, I'm like, I think that's a good idea. I was not a big fan of how that was going.
I will say outright, I think both of you guys will hate Silent Hill 4, not for the story, but for the gameplay.
We got Silent Hill Origins in 2007. What's
originally
that?
A PSP game.
Oh, okay.
But also ported to PS1, and it's like $100, and I don't want to spend that to get it.
Not yet.
Just don't do it. God,
he'll do it
it
eventually. Like Ryan needs that complete Silent Hill collection. Am I wrong, Ryan? Am I wrong?
You're not wrong.
It's gonna happen, Keith.
Yeah.
And then we got Silent Hill Homecoming on the PS3 and 360 in 2008. I don't know what the hell this is. Shattered. Okay, because it's gonna come up because I've heard this game and Silent Hill 1 be compared. So what is Shattered Memories?
So Shattered Memories it's a reimagining of Silent Hill 1. So it's starts similar with Harry Mason crashing his car and his daughter goes missing. But basically from there, it's a completely different story. So it's in its own universe, and it is definitely, I think it's on multiple consoles, but the Wii version, it felt like it was built for the Wii, and I think that's what it's best played on, because you take away the motion controls, it kind of loses a little bit of its luster.
Okay. 2012, we got Silent Hill Downpour.
The only mainline Silent Hill game I have yet to beat, so I still got to tackle that one myself.
Interesting. Then 2012, the Silent Hill HD collection, which includes
Just just burn it.
3, yeah. And then easily the favorite version of Silent Hill that everybody has always played and loves is Silent Hill Book of Memories, where they turned it into a top-down action game.
Yeah.
For the Vita.
No, thank you. Yeah.
What?
Yeah, it's like a 4-player co-op thing. Like, I played the demo, so that's how I know. And I'm like, man, I haven't played a damn Silent Hill game in full. This ain't no damn... Like, these hills are not that silent, okay? Yeah, Keith. So, having said that, Keith, are you happy? Are you satisfied that you finally did play this? And now, even as a podcast, it's like, I think this is a milestone because we've covered, I think, the minimal essentials, let's call it. Like, we can keep going, right? And we are with other games, but it's like we've done RE2 and 3. We've done Silent Hill 1 and 2. Where do you think this goes from here? Is like, aside from like Silent Hill 3, is there any other like horror game that both of you guys go like, hey, I have experiences, I've heard about this, or it's time to go back to?
That's a tough one for me, really, because I live in the Resident Evil bubble more than anything. So the first thing that you say when, oh, well, what's next when it comes to horror things, my brain goes, well, let's go right back to Resident Evil. We got some good ones to cover there still. And beyond these two genres, I know they're out there, but I don't really know much about any other games. Like, I guess there's the Amnesia games and stuff like that are really coveted. And I don't know, are the Five Nights at Freddy's games survival
Yeah,
horror?
I don't know. There's some games on
Are those
PS2.
nostalgic yet?
There's some PS2 games like Shattered Shaun Wolf something.
Shaun of the Dead?
Shaun
What?
Wolf something.
Shattered
Is that a
Shaun
game?
Wolf. Yeah.
But I know there's like a trilogy of like very expensive PS2 games.
What, Fatal Frame? Is
Oh,
something
okay.
I've heard of.
It's not that, but that is something else I was thinking about. It's like
Oh, and there's Parasite Eve. We need to play Parasite Eve on
Eve,
this show.
that's
see,
true.
but between that and Crisis, I would definitely go more into Parasite Eve. I think that it would be a nice...
Parasite
I
Eve,
agree.
interesting. It's more of like an RP. It's like a survival horror RPG. Like the combat is RPG based. So, but I mean that could be an interesting twist. So, I'm definitely open to that.
Definitely. But everybody, I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's like these specific games that are staples in video game history, aside from like, it's a good game. Like we never doubted that going into this game. Like, do some things hold up? No, but I mean, it came out in 99 and it's tank controls and a whole lot of things. But if all of you want to keep carrying the conversation, don't forget there is a casttothepast.com/Discord where Mr. McNulty continues to publish his sexy growing collection of retro gaming alongside everybody else.
Fun facts before we fully close out.
Oh, okay. We ain't closing down, man. Just, everybody, if you enjoy this podcast, leave the positive reviews or talk smack about Keith. Ryan, bring up some of them facts.
Okay,
both,
so
yeah.
one of the more obvious ones that a lot of people have heard about is the fog actually originally was not in Silent Hill, but basically like testing it in the terrible draw distance, because it's not, we talk about how we love them pre-rendered images and fixed camera angles in RE2, but actually Silent Hill's like fully rendered 3D through the whole game, and you can sort of change the camera angles. It's not always fixed camera angle. Anyway, because of all that fanciness, the draw distance is god awful.
Bad.
So especially during the daytime, the fog was basically implemented to mask the terrible draw distance. And then obviously when it came to the future iterations on PS2, they kept it as like an atmosphere thing to keep you like uncomfortable, that even though you're in these open environments, you feel very closed in. So
for this
I thought that was pretty
and
cool.
every N64 game.
So the big thing that I wanted to bring up that I just thought was really cool was the developer for Silent Hill who was responsible for doing the cutscenes, the 3D cutscenes. His name, I'm gonna butcher his name, but it's Takayoshi Sato. He basically, what happened was that he started working on the 3D cutscenes and they liked what he was doing, but his boss wanted to find somebody to put above him to give him direction. It's apparently in Japanese companies, they don't want to credit someone who was young on the team. He was like a young kind of up and comer. So they wanted to kind of put someone above him who would take credit for all the CGI cutscenes. But he didn't want to do that because like he had 30 to 40% of all the movie sequences already done. So he wanted to get credit, and he just said, I don't need anyone above me. And then his boss just said, fine, then you can finish them on your own. So basically for like, he said he didn't go home for 3 years. Basically,
What?
He lived at the office. He slept under the desk. And then like at midnight after everyone went home, he said it was his real chance to work because he had access to all the computers. So he had over 150 computers, like all like rendering cutscenes for him.
Ryan, I'm about to blow your mind.
Yeah.
Lisa could not leave the hospital. What if Lisa and the CGI artist, they're the same person?
Yeah,
it was a
what
metaphor.
if that was the inspiration? That's
Seriously,
true.
it's like, if you think about
sense.
that, when you said that, I'm like, wait, this makes more sense than even part of the story. Also, like, worst game crunch ever?
Yeah,
no kidding.
Yeah.
Like, pick your hill to die on, man.
He really wanted his name as the only one responsible for those cutscenes. So, like, that's just crazy. He did those completely on his own. He's just like, everyone's asleep.
Impressive.
I'm using all your computers to do the rest of my work. So,
Wow. That is insane. I mean, that's like bittersweet. It's like, oh, these cutscenes are good. Oh my goodness. I'm just like, poor guy.
yeah.
Oh, so sad. And with that, Ryan, you feeling good about this episode? Like, I mean, I gotta close it off asking with you, man.
I feel good. I think you guys have tackled two. You've now played 2 of the 3 what I consider essential Silent Hill games. So we have one more before I'll get off your back about Silent Hill. How about that?
Deal. I can agree to these terms.
Definitely. And everybody, like, we are getting ready for next year, because one of the best and worst things about a podcast like this is that we're always thinking of like what to play or watch next. And I think that, this year we talked about the Spider-Man trilogy, which is interesting because now with all the rumors lingering, I'm like, oh man, we chose a good time to talk about some Spider-Man movies, and maybe we talk about some more down the line. And we've done Terminator, but then we have Silent Hill is growing. We have the Resident Evil library growing in terms of episodes. So if there's any trilogy or sequels of games or movies that you think will be really fun for us to review sporadically or something like that, once again, that is acasttothepast.com/Discord, or you can reach us out on social media, acasttothepast on Twitter and Facebook. And with that being said, this has been another wonderful. This is the real world. This ain't no dark world. No.
You don't want to go to
things.
my nightmare world. Let me tells you.
I mean, your background. I'm just gonna say, like in the video version, it's like your background is like all red right now. So I think you're not in the real world, Keith.
Ooh, now we're spooky.
Oh, no. Keith turned his lights off. He's like John Cena now. I can't see him. So anyway, this has been an episode of A Cast
To the
Past Spooky World.
Speaking of John Cena, he got married.
Yeah.
Oh, he did.
Congratulations.
Yeah. You go to the wedding, Ryan?
Our congratulations go out to you, John
Yes.
Cena.
We love you, Cena.
Hey, anybody that's a happy day in his life, hopefully. So congratulations are in order.